The sea has always been a place of mystery. For some, it is freedom, escape, and the promise of a new beginning. For others, it is terror, despair, and death. Between 1979 and 1981, as the shadows of war stretched long over Southeast Asia, the waters of the Gulf of Thailand became a graveyard. Vietnamese men, women, and children, ordinary people who had lost their homes, their families, their country, boarded fragile fishing boats in desperation, clinging to a dream of survival. But what awaited them was not salvation. It was cruelty. It was the hunt. They called them boat people. But in those years, they became prey. This is not just a story of numbers or headlines. This is the story of people. Mothers who carried children across a sea of nightmares. Fathers who risked everything, and entire families whose cries were swallowed by the waves. And it is also the story of those who chose violence, who turned the sea into a killing field, and who faced little justice for their crimes. This is the dark chronicle of the forgotten massacre of the Vietnamese boat people. Part 1. Into the Sea of Shadows. The year was 1979. The war in Vietnam was over, but peace never came. The end of the conflict in 1975 had brought the unification of Vietnam under the communist regime. Yet instead of stability, there was fear, persecution, and economic collapse. Families who had once lived ordinary lives now faced suspicion if they had ties to the Old South, or worse, to America. Merchants, teachers, students, anyone seen as a potential enemy of the new state, lived in constant fear. The future looked suffocating, especially for the ethnic Chinese community in Vietnam, who were singled out, pressured, and in many cases stripped of livelihoods. For many, there was only one path left: escape. But escape meant the sea. Families sold everything they had to buy passage on ramshackle boats. They crammed into vessels barely meant for fishing, not for carrying hundreds of desperate souls across oceans. For the families boarding those boats, the decision was unbearable: leave home and risk death at sea, or stay and wither under oppression. And so, wave after wave of refugees sailed into the Gulf of Thailand, their eyes fixed on Malaysia, Hong Kong, or Indonesia. But the sea was not kind. Storms claimed many. Hunger and thirst gnawed at their strength. Mechanical failures doomed entire voyages. And as if that suffering was not enough, there was another predator waiting in the water: pirates. At first, the stories came quietly. Survivors whispered about boats that vanished, about women dragged away, about families never seen again. But soon, the whispers grew louder. UNHCR officers and aid workers began hearing the same accounts repeated. Boats intercepted by groups of armed Thai fishermen, the men beaten or killed, the women assaulted, the children left to die. Imagine the scene: a boat of refugees drifting after days without food. Then, on the horizon, another boat appears. Relief floods their faces. They believe it is rescue. They wave, they call out, they beg for water. But instead of safety, what arrives is a nightmare. Pirates clamber aboard with machetes and guns, eyes searching not for people to save, but for gold, jewelry, anything of value. In minutes, the little hope that carried these families across the water is extinguished. From 1979 to 1981, the pattern became horrifyingly common. Thai fishing boats, some operating alone, others in bands, turned piracy into a grim industry. They preyed on the weakest, knowing that the refugees had no protection and no state to defend them. Men who resisted were stabbed or shot. Women, many of them young girls, were dragged to the pirate boats, raped repeatedly, and sometimes sold into trafficking. Entire boats were burned, their passengers thrown into the sea. It is said that more than 40,000 Vietnamese refugees met their deaths this way, their bodies disappearing into the waters, leaving behind only the testimony of survivors. Let us step closer into one story. A family of 5, huddled together after 2 weeks at sea. Their boat is leaking, the sails torn. Then, the pirates arrive. The father pleads, offering the last pieces of jewelry hidden in his clothing. But it is not enough. They beat him until he collapses. The mother clutches her daughter, only for the girl to be ripped from her arms. The boy, only 10 years old, screams until he is silenced by a knife. Hours later, the boat is abandoned, drifting. The survivors are alive, but their souls are broken. These were not isolated incidents. Reports from survivors flooded refugee camps in Malaysia and Hong Kong. Aid workers documented the wounds, burns, broken bones, and the vacant stares of women who had endured the unendurable. And yet, little was done. The Thai authorities, faced with international pressure, acknowledged some piracy but downplayed its scale. In a time when Thailand itself was in turmoil, political instability, economic strain, fear of Vietnamese expansion, the plight of Vietnamese refugees was seen as an unwelcome burden. Fishermen accused of piracy were rarely prosecuted. The ocean was vast, evidence hard to gather, and survivors too broken to fight for justice. Still, their stories could not be buried. At Kao Kra Island, a small rocky outpost in the Gulf, the nightmare was visible. Refugees described being taken there by pirates, where women were raped on the beaches, men beaten, and some burned alive when pirates set fire to the hillsides to smoke out those hiding. UNHCR investigators confirmed these accounts, noting one woman who had survived with severe burns after hiding in the brush. She had thought the fire was only to scare them until she realized it was meant to kill. Think of the cruelty. Refugees fleeing a war, already stripped of everything, forced to hide on a barren island, only to be hunted like animals. By 1980, newspapers around the world were reporting the horrors: boat people attacked by Thai pirates, read headlines in Washington and Paris. But the world was tired of Vietnam. After decades of war, many nations turned away, unwilling to accept more refugees or confront Thailand too strongly, especially as the Cold War made Thailand an important ally against communism. And so, the deaths continued. For those who survived, the scars never healed. In camps across Southeast Asia, survivors whispered their memories. A young woman in Malaysia recalled being taken with others to a pirate camp, where she was kept for days, then cast adrift again. Another survivor in Hong Kong remembered her younger brother being thrown overboard for crying too loudly. The trauma passed through generations, leaving silence where there should have been remembrance. The refugees called it the time of the hunted sea. For them, the water that was supposed to carry them to freedom became the place where hope drowned. And so, the Gulf of Thailand became not only a geographical space, but a memory of horror. Between 1979 and 1981, tens of thousands fled across it, but many never reached shore. Some boats were swallowed by storms, some by hunger, but too many were claimed by the hands of men who saw weakness and turned it into profit. The world rarely speaks of this today. In Thailand, the story is nearly forgotten. In Vietnam, it is a shadow in the history books. But in the hearts of survivors, the memories remain alive into their souls like scars from a wound that never truly healed. This was not just piracy. This was massacre. This was the sea turned into a killing field. Part 2. The Season of Pirates. The Gulf of Thailand in 1979 became more than a body of water. It became a hunting ground. From the wooden fishing boats of Trat and Songkhla, from Kao Kra's isolated coves, from tiny harbors that barely showed on maps, the pirates began their season of terror. For them, the exodus of tens of thousands of Vietnamese fleeing their homeland was not a tragedy, it was opportunity. Gold, jewelry, and desperate human lives bobbed on the waves, waiting to be plundered. The season began quietly, almost invisibly, like the shift of wind before a storm. At first, it was just a handful of fishing boats that intercepted refugee vessels. They demanded valuables, then departed. But soon, word spread along Thailand's southern coast that the sea was full of treasure-laden prey. By the end of 1979, a dark industry had emerged, one where ordinary fishermen transformed into predators, armed with knives, machetes, and sometimes pistols. These were not pirates in the romantic sense of myth and folklore. They were men who understood that on the open sea, in the chaos of post-war Southeast Asia, they could kill without consequence. Refugee boats leaving Vietnam were fragile, often no larger than 20 meters, built for rivers, not oceans. Overloaded with families, packed with children and elders, they sat low in the water, engines sputtering. Some vessels carried 100 souls, others only 20, but they all carried fear, the fear of pirates, whispered from one refugee camp to another before departure. The warnings proved true with terrifying regularity. Imagine the scene: a refugee boat drifting under the harsh sun, women holding their children tightly, men scanning the horizon for land. Suddenly, from behind the curve of the waves, another boat appears, long, lean, faster. Its crew are young men, bare-chested, their faces obscured by cloth, carrying hooks and blades. They circle the refugee vessel like wolves around cornered prey. There is no escape. The refugees cannot outrun them. The pirates shout in Thai, incomprehensible to most on board, but their gestures are clear, hands raised, valuables handed over. The refugees obey, trembling, offering gold wedding bands, jade pendants, small bundles of cash wrapped in cloth. The pirates snatch them, laughing, sometimes satisfied enough to leave, but more often, greed drives them further. They drag women aboard their boat. They beat men who resist. They stab to assert dominance, and in countless cases, they kill. It was not isolated. The pattern repeated itself across hundreds of encounters. Survivors later testified of seeing family members slaughtered, daughters and wives taken away, children thrown into the sea. In one incident, a refugee recalled that the pirates forced the men of their boat to strip naked, searching every fold of clothing, then executed them one by one, when they found nothing more to take. Women were assaulted on the deck, as their children cried beside them. When the pirates finally left, they punctured the refugee boat's hull, leaving the survivors to drown. The Thai government at the time claimed helplessness. Authorities insisted that the sea was vast, impossible to police, but the survivors told another story, of Thai naval patrols watching from afar and not intervening, of pirates openly selling refugee women into brothels on Thai soil, of local villagers boasting about the loot taken from the Vietnamese boats. The line between pirate and fisherman blurred, and the line between pirate and state became even murkier. For the refugees, the season of pirates meant traveling in terror. Families debated whether to attempt the voyage at all, knowing that starvation in Vietnam might be preferable to the horrors that awaited at sea. Yet desperation left them no choice. So they prepared in the only way they could, by swallowing jewelry to hide it, by tying small gold coins into their hair, by praying. For some, those desperate measures saved them. For others, they became fatal. When pirates cut open bodies searching for swallowed gems, the pirates adapted quickly. They began to work in coordinated groups, one vessel attacking from the front, another from behind. They learned the signs of valuable cargo, targeting boats with better engines or passengers who seemed wealthier. Women were their most sought-after prize, not just for immediate assault, but for trafficking. Countless Vietnamese girls and women vanished into the underworld of Thai ports, never to be seen again by their families. Their screams, recorded in the testimonies of survivors, linger like echoes over the Gulf of Thailand. By 1980, international humanitarian agencies had begun documenting the scale of atrocities. The UNHCR received reports of entire refugee boats disappearing, of thousands vanishing without a trace. Some boats were later found adrift, bodies floating inside, stripped of valuables. Journalists who visited Kokra Island uncovered a chilling truth. It had become a pirate holding ground. Refugee women were imprisoned there, repeatedly assaulted, before being sold or discarded. One investigator described the sand as littered with broken jewelry and torn clothing, mute testimony of the crimes committed. The season of pirates did not last weeks, but years. From 1979 to 1981, more than 40,000 Vietnamese refugees at sea are believed to have been attacked. Some estimates suggest that as many as half of those who fled by boat fell victim to violence, whether by drowning, starvation, or pirate assault. Of those who died, most left no graves. The sea became their unmarked tomb. The pirates themselves were never legendary figures. They were not captains with names remembered in history. They were nameless men, blending back into their villages after each raid, their pockets heavier with gold, their consciences erased by profit. But to the survivors, they were monsters. Children grew into adults, haunted by memories of their mothers screaming, their sisters vanishing, their fathers killed before their eyes. Survivors in refugee camps in Malaysia and Hong Kong told their stories in trembling voices, often ignored by the world. Thailand faced mounting international pressure, but prosecutions were rare. When a few pirates were arrested, sentences were light. Many were released after a short time. Local communities often shielded them, claiming they were simple fishermen. Meanwhile, the violence continued. The Gulf of Thailand remained a watery battlefield where no one came to rescue the victims. Yet amid the darkness, there were stories of survival. A few refugee boats managed to repel pirates, armed with makeshift weapons or sheer determination. In one case, a father fought with a fishing spear, killing one pirate before being cut down himself. His family survived because of his sacrifice. In another, a group of refugees deliberately sank their own boat in shallow waters, forcing the pirates to abandon them. They clung to debris until a passing ship rescued them days later. These rare moments of resistance became legends whispered among the refugees, proof that not all surrendered meekly to the predators of the sea. Still, the overall memory remains one of overwhelming brutality. The Gulf was transformed into a killing ground, where human desperation collided with human cruelty. For the refugees, the nightmare did not end when the pirates left. They were often stranded without food, water, or an engine. Some drifted for weeks, watching loved ones die beside them. And always, the horizon carried the fear of another pirate boat appearing. By the early 1980s, international naval patrols, especially from Western countries escorting refugee vessels, began to reduce the frequency of attacks. But by then, the damage was done. Tens of thousands were dead. Tens of thousands more were scarred for life. The Thai pirate massacres became one of the darkest and least remembered episodes of Southeast Asia as post-war history. The season of pirates was not just about greed. It was about the collapse of morality in a time of chaos. It was about the world turning its gaze away from refugees, allowing them to be hunted on the open sea. It was about how quickly human beings can descend into predators when law, order, and compassion vanish. And for the survivors, the memories remain raw. Even decades later, the mention of the Gulf of Thailand brings tears to their eyes. They remember the sound of engines approaching in the night. They remember the laughter of pirates as they plundered. They remember the silence after, broken only by the waves swallowing their dead. This was the season of pirates, a season of blood, of screams, of vanished lives, a season where the ocean itself became complicit in genocide, swallowing evidence, erasing names, but never the pain. Part 3. The Forgotten Graves of the Sea. The Gulf of Thailand still looks serene to the naked eye. Blue waves roll gently, fishermen mend their nets on quiet shores, and tourists sail across its waters without the faintest idea of the horrors once written there. But beneath that calm surface lies a memory that cannot be erased. For between 1979 and 1981, the sea became a graveyard without markers, without monuments, and without names. Tens of thousands of Vietnamese refugees, men, women, and children vanished into these waters. Some were drowned by storm and starvation. Others were butchered or brutalized by the pirates who prowled the waves, and their bodies, swallowed by the deep, became the forgotten graves of the sea. For those who survived, memory became the only headstone. In refugee camps scattered across Southeast Asia, survivors whispered their stories in corners of tents and huts. They spoke of nights when pirate boats came like shadows, their engines low and predatory. They remembered the screams of women dragged across the decks, the sound of children thrown overboard, the sight of fathers executed in front of their families. These voices carried across borders, across oceans, into courtrooms, and eventually into the halls of the United Nations. But even then, the voices were muffled by politics, by indifference, by the slow machinery of international justice. One woman, who lost her daughter on Kokra Island, told investigators, "The sea remembers, even if people forget. My child's body is in that water. When you look at the waves, you see only beauty. But for me, I see her face every time." Her testimony became one of many buried in reports, filed in cabinets, lost under the tide of history. The forgotten graves had no stones, only echoes in memory. The tragedy of the boat people was not confined to the Gulf of Thailand. Across the South China Sea, across the Pacific routes, countless Vietnamese fled into danger. But in the Gulf, the horror was uniquely sharp. Here, they were not only fleeing storms and hunger, they were hunted deliberately, systematically, as prey. The pirates turned desperation into a marketplace. Women were trafficked, sold in ports, discarded when their value was spent. Gold changed hands in taverns and markets, its shine mocking the blood it carried. And still, governments did little. Thailand's official position remained denial or minimization. Pirates were dismissed as isolated criminals, not evidence of systematic massacres. But for the survivors, the pattern was undeniable. Whole communities were destroyed. Out of one refugee boat of 110 people, only 12 survived to reach Malaysia. Out of another, carrying 47, not a single person was ever seen again. These numbers are not abstract, they are families wiped from history. Generations cut down before they had a chance to begin anew. As the years passed, the world began to forget. The refugee crisis waned. The wars in Indochina moved into new chapters, and the pirates returned to fishing. Their crimes dissolved into the normalcy of daily life. No monuments were raised on Thai shores to the victims. No museums kept their stories alive. Even Koh Kra Island, once littered with the torn clothing of assaulted women, eventually became another tropical site, its dark past erased by silence. The forgotten graves remained in the sea, invisible to the eyes of those who did not wish to see. But trauma does not disappear so easily. For the Vietnamese diaspora, especially those who fled by boat, the ocean remains a place of mourning. Community gatherings in the United States, Canada, and Australia still hold ceremonies for the boat people lost at sea. Candles are lit, prayers are whispered, names are called for the missing, though many names are gone forever. Survivors describe dreams where they see the waves rising again, carrying the voices of those lost. They dream of hands reaching out of the water, of faces calling their names, of the endless horizon with no rescue ship in sight. The sea, for them, is both a wound and a cemetery. The forgotten graves also left scars on Thailand's reputation. While the government never formally acknowledged complicity, the silence spoke volumes. Human rights groups documented the evidence, but without accountability, justice was left unfinished. It became one more chapter in Southeast Asia's long history of atrocities that are never fully confronted. And yet, the silence is perhaps as telling as the violence itself. It reveals a truth about how the world values certain lives, and how easily suffering can be swept beneath waves when it belongs to the powerless. The scale of the massacres is staggering to contemplate. Over 40,000 refugees attacked, thousands raped, mutilated, and killed. If this had been land-based, it would have been remembered as a genocide. But because it happened at sea, far from cameras, far from records, it drifted into obscurity. The water became both weapon and witness, hiding bodies, dissolving evidence, muting the cries. And yet, history does not vanish. It lingers in fragments, in testimonies, in photographs, in broken jewelry recovered from Koh Kra, in the haunted eyes of survivors. These fragments demand recognition. They demand that the forgotten graves of the sea not remain forgotten. To remember them is not only to honor the dead, but to confront the cruelty that allowed them to die. The forgotten graves are also a warning. They remind us of what happens when refugees are demonized, when they are pushed to the margins of humanity, when their cries are dismissed as distant noise. The refugees of 1979 to 81 were not seen as families or children. They were seen as burdens, as threats, as opportunities for profit. And in that dehumanization, atrocity was born. The sea became a reflection of human greed, fear, and indifference. Still, within this darkness, there are lights. Survivors carried their pain into new lives, raising children, building communities in exile. They told their stories when the world did not want to listen. They kept alive the memory of those who did not survive. Their resilience itself is a monument, carved not in stone, but in blood, memory, and persistence. Today, when ships cross the Gulf of Thailand, few passengers know that the waters below are filled with ghosts. The forgotten graves whisper only to those who choose to hear. But for those who survived, for the descendants of the boat people, the whispers are always there. They cannot look at the sea without remembering the faces left behind. The tragedy of the boat people massacres, like so many dark chapters of history, asks us a question. Will we remember, or will we forget? Will we allow the waves to erase the voices of the murdered, or will we speak them into history, giving them the dignity of being known, even if belatedly? Memory is the only weapon against forgetting, and the only grave marker these lost souls will ever have. As the story closes, the image remains. The Gulf at sunset, the sky burning red, waves glimmering with light. To a traveler, it is beautiful, but to history, it is haunted. Beneath those waters sleep thousands whose only crime was seeking freedom. Their graves are not carved on land. They are written in the tide, in silence, in shadows, and it is up to us to remember them. Because if we do not remember, the sea will, and the sea remembers everything. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.